My name is Serafina Mitchell, and I'm 24 years old. 3 months ago, I watched my entire world crumble during what should have been a simple family dinner. My billionaire grandfather sat across from my father, who was screaming demands about inheritance and respect. My mother remained eerily silent, her hands trembling as she gripped her wine glass. What I discovered that night about my family's darkest secrets would lead me down a path of calculated revenge that would destroy everything I once believed about blood loyalty and expose the truth that had been buried for decades. Before we dive into this family drama that'll shock you to your core, I need to know, where are you watching from today? If you're ready for a story about betrayal, revenge, and justice served ice cold, smash that like button and subscribe, because this tale of family destruction is just getting started. Trust me, you won't see this twist coming. The evening started like any other family gathering at Grandfather Edmund's sprawling estate in the Hamptons. The marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and the smell of rosemary lamb filled the dining room. But there was tension in the air that I couldn't quite place. My father, Marcus, had been unusually quiet during cocktails, and my mother, Catherine, kept checking her phone nervously. Grandfather Edmund, at 87, still commanded respect with his sharp blue eyes and impeccable posture. He'd built his empire from nothing, turning a small construction company into a multi-billion-dollar real estate dynasty. Growing up, I'd always admired his stories of determination and hard work. He was my hero, the man who taught me that integrity meant everything. The explosion came during dessert. "Edmund, we need to talk about the foundation," my father said, his voice cutting through the pleasant dinner conversation. "The board meeting is next week, and I need to know where you stand on the Chicago project." My grandfather set down his fork carefully. "Marcus, this is dinner. Business can wait." "No, it can't wait." My father's voice rose, his face reddening. "I've been patient for too long. That Chicago deal is worth 200 million, and you're dragging your feet because of some ridiculous moral concerns." I felt my stomach drop. The Chicago project involved demolishing low-income housing to build luxury condos. I'd heard whispers about it at family gatherings, but I'd assumed grandfather would never approve something so heartless. "Those people have lived there for generations," grandfather said quietly. "We can find other opportunities that don't involve destroying communities." My father slammed his hand on the table, making the crystal glasses jump. "Listen to me or get out of your own goddamn company. I'm tired of your bleeding heart nonsense. This is business, not charity." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother sat frozen, her face pale as porcelain. She knew something. I could see it in her eyes. But she said nothing, just stared at her untouched tiramisu. "Marcus," grandfather said, his voice dangerously low, "you're out of line." "Am I? Because last I checked, I'm the one running day-to-day operations while you play philanthropist. I'm the one who's been cleaning up your messes for the past 5 years." What messes? I found myself asking, my voice barely above a whisper. Both men turned to look at me, and I saw something flash in my father's eyes. Panic, maybe. My mother's grip on her wine glass tightened until her knuckles were white. "Serafina, this doesn't concern you," my father said quickly. But Grandfather Edmund's expression had changed. He was looking at me with something that looked almost like guilt. "Actually, perhaps it does concern her. She's old enough to understand the truth about this family." "Edmund, don't." My mother spoke for the first time, her voice sharp with warning. "Don't what, Mom?" I pressed. "Don't tell me what. What truth?" My father stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "We're leaving. Catherine, get your purse." "Sit down, Marcus," grandfather said, and there was steel in his voice that I'd never heard before. "Your daughter deserves to know what kind of man her father really is. The next 20 minutes would haunt me forever." Through raised voices and accusations, the truth came spilling out like poison from a broken bottle. My father hadn't just been cleaning up messes. He'd been creating them. Bribery, illegal demolitions, families forced from their homes in the middle of the night. environmental violations that had poisoned entire neighborhoods. And my mother, she'd known everything, had helped cover it up, had been complicit in every single crime. The foundation that bore our family name, the charity work I'd been so proud of, it was all a front, a way to launder money and buy political influence. The scholarship I'd received for Columbia funded by blood money stolen from the very communities we claimed to help. I sat there listening to my parents destroy every belief I'd ever held about them, about our family, about myself. My father's face was red with rage and alcohol spittle flying as he screamed about necessity and survival. My mother remained silent, but her silence spoke volumes. She wasn't shocked by these revelations. She was angry they'd been exposed. Serafina has a right to know, grandfather said when my father finally ran out of steam. She's going to inherit this company someday. She should understand what she's inheriting. Over my dead body, my father snarled. She's too soft, just like you've become. She'd run everything into the ground with her bleeding heart idealism. That's when I understood. This wasn't just about one building project in Chicago. This was about everything. The company, the family legacy, my future. My father wanted to push grandfather out completely and take over the empire, moral consequences be damned. As we drove home that night, the silence in the car was suffocating. I stared out the window at the passing lights, my mind reeling. Every happy memory from my childhood was now tainted. Every family vacation, every Christmas morning, every proud moment when people recognized our name, it was all built on suffering and lies. When we got home, I went straight to my childhood bedroom and locked the door. I needed time to think, to process what I'd learned. But as I sat on my bed, surrounded by photos and mementos from what I now realized was a completely fabricated life, one thing became crystal clear. I couldn't let this continue. I couldn't be part of a family that destroyed lives for profit. And I definitely couldn't let my father take over the company and make everything worse. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. If my parents wanted to play dirty, then I'd learn their game. But I'd play it better than they ever could. The next morning, I woke up with the kind of clarity that only comes after your entire world has been shattered and rebuilt in a single evening. I'd spent hours staring at the ceiling, cycling through shock, anger, and disgust, before finally arriving at something much more dangerous: cold, calculated determination. I called in sick to my job at the nonprofit where I worked, another layer of irony that wasn't lost on me, and instead drove back to Grandfather Edmund's estate. I needed to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with, and I suspected he was the only one who'd give me honest answers. I found him in his study, looking every one of his 87 years. The confrontation with my father had clearly taken its toll. But when he saw me, his eyes sharpened with something like hope. "I wondered if you'd come back," he said, gesturing for me to sit in the leather chair across from his desk. "I imagine you have questions." "I have more than questions, Grandpa. I need to know everything, every detail, every crime, every cover-up, and I need to know how we're going to fix it." He studied my face for a long moment, then reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a thick manila folder. "I've been documenting everything for the past 3 years, ever since I discovered what Marcus was doing. I kept hoping I could handle it quietly within the family. But last night," he shook his head, "last night I realized that some cancers can't be cut out gently." The folder contained a nightmare of evidence: financial records showing bribes to city officials, email chains discussing relocating families with no mention of compensation or alternative housing, environmental reports that had been buried or falsified, photographs of demolished neighborhoods where children had played just weeks before. But the worst part was seeing my mother's name throughout the documents. Catherine Mitchell signing off on payments to silence victims. Catherine Mitchell organizing charity events that served as cover for money laundering. Catherine Mitchell, my mother who'd taught me about kindness and justice, systematically destroying both. "Why didn't you stop them sooner?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Because Marcus is my son," Grandfather said quietly. Because Catherine has been like a daughter to me for over 25 years. Because I kept believing they could be reasoned with, that they'd remember who they used to be. He paused, looking out the window at his perfectly manicured gardens. And because I was a coward, I didn't want to face the possibility that my own family had become everything I'd spent my life fighting against. I spent the next 6 hours going through every document, memorizing names and dates and dollar amounts. My parents had been busy. In the past 5 years alone, they'd displaced over 300 families, poisoned 2 water supplies, and stolen approximately $40 million through various fraudulent schemes. The scope was breathtaking in its cruelty. But they'd also been sloppy. In their arrogance, they'd left paper trails everywhere. Email servers, bank records, recorded phone calls. It was all there waiting for someone smart enough to connect the dots. "What's your plan?" I asked grandfather as the sun began to set. "I was going to turn everything over to the FBI," he admitted. "Let the law handle it." "No," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "The law moves too slowly, and they'll find ways to wiggle out of it. Rich people always do. We need something faster, something more comprehensive." That's when I told him my idea. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of just exposing their crimes, we'd use those crimes against them. We'd let them destroy themselves with their own greed and arrogance. But it would require patience, careful timing, and a performance that would make Broadway jealous. First, I needed to become the daughter they thought they wanted. I needed to convince them that I was ready to join the family business, that I'd gotten over my bleeding heart idealism and was prepared to be practical about making money. I needed them to trust me enough to involve me in their schemes. Then, once I was inside their circle of corruption, I'd document everything firsthand. I'd gather evidence they couldn't deny or explain away. And when the time was right, I'd destroy them so thoroughly that they'd never be able to hurt another innocent family. The hardest part would be pretending to be someone I wasn't, sitting at dinner tables and smiling while they planned their next atrocity. But every time I felt my resolve wavering, I looked at the photographs of displaced families and remembered that this was bigger than my discomfort. Over the next 2 weeks, I transformed myself. I quit my nonprofit job and told my parents I was ready to grow up and join the family business. I bought expensive clothes and started wearing makeup every day. I practiced looking bored when they talked about their charitable work and excited when they discussed profitable opportunities. My mother was suspicious at first. "This is quite a change, darling," she said over lunch at her favorite restaurant. "Just 2 weeks ago, you were lecturing us about social responsibility." "I've been thinking about what Dad said," I lied smoothly. "About being practical. I mean, I can't save the world on a nonprofit salary, can I? Maybe I can do more good from inside the company, use our resources more, strategically." I could see her weighing my words, trying to decide if I was sincere or playing some kind of game. But greed won out, as it always did with her. The possibility of having me as an ally, someone who could help legitimize their operations with my youth and supposed idealism, was too tempting to pass up. "Well," she said finally, "if you're serious about this, I suppose we could find you a position. Nothing too major at first, of course. You'll need to prove yourself." "Of course," I agreed. "I understand I need to earn my place." That night I called grandfather to report my progress. "Phase 1 complete," I told him. "They're taking the bait. Are you sure you can handle this, Serafina? Once you're inside, there won't be any going back. They'll expect you to participate in things that will make you sick." "I can handle it," I said, and I meant it. They made me part of this when they used blood money to pay for my education. Now they're going to learn what their investment actually bought them. My first day at Mitchell and Associates felt surreal. Walking through the gleaming offices where I'd spent countless childhood afternoons, I now saw everything differently. The expensive artwork on the walls, the marble reception desk, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Manhattan. It was all beautiful, and it was all paid for with other people's suffering. My father had arranged for me to start in the development department, working under Victoria Hartwell, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who'd been with the company for over a decade. What I didn't know until later was that Victoria had her own reasons for hating my parents, reasons that would make her my most valuable ally. "So you're the prodigal daughter," Victoria said when I was introduced to her team. "I've heard you're quite the idealist. This should be interesting." For the first few weeks, I played my part perfectly. I attended meetings where they discussed displacing families as casually as ordering coffee. I smiled and nodded when my father explained how environmental regulations were just suggestions for people who know how to navigate the system. I even contributed ideas suggesting ways to make their operations more efficient, all while secretly recording every conversation on the tiny device grandfather had given me. But it was during my third week that everything changed. I was working late, going through files for a project in Detroit, when I stumbled across something that made my blood run cold. Hidden among routine development documents was a folder labeled Hartford Solutions, and inside were plans for the demolition of Riverside Elementary School. Not just demolition, illegal demolition. The school was scheduled to be torn down in the middle of the night while the community was fighting the closure in court. 400 children would arrive Monday morning to find their school reduced to rubble, their fight for education over before they even knew it had begun. The demolition was scheduled for this weekend. I was still staring at the documents in shock when Victoria appeared beside my desk. "Find something interesting," she asked, but her tone wasn't mocking. It was careful, almost. "Hopeful they're going to destroy a school," I whispered. "An elementary school. While children think they're going back to class on Monday." Victoria sat down heavily in the chair next to mine. For a moment, she just stared at the documents. Then she did something I didn't expect. She started to cry. "That's my daughter's school," she said quietly. "Isabella is 7 years old, and she loves that place more than anything in the world. She doesn't understand why Mommy works for the people trying to take it away." That's when Victoria told me her story. She'd started at Mitchell and Associates 12 years ago, young and ambitious, and desperate to prove herself in a male-dominated industry. She'd worked her way up through talent and dedication, never questioning where the money came from or how the deals got made. But then she'd gotten pregnant, had Isabella, and suddenly everything looked different. She'd tried to quit 3 years ago when she first discovered the extent of the company's illegal activities. But my father had made it clear that leaving wasn't an option. He had documentation of her involvement in several questionable deals. Documentation that could send her to prison and leave Isabella without a mother. She was trapped, forced to participate in destroying the very community where she was raising her daughter. "I've been looking for a way out for years," she admitted. "Someone with enough power to protect me when I finally speak up, I think. I think maybe that person is you." I made a decision that night that accelerated everything. Instead of waiting months to gather evidence, I decided to save Riverside Elementary School. And I knew exactly how to do it. The next morning, I marched into my father's office with a proposal that would sound completely reasonable to his greedy ears while secretly sabotaging his entire operation. "Dad, I've been thinking about the Hartford Solutions project." I began, settling into the chair across from his massive desk. "Oh, and what brilliant insights has my daughter discovered." He didn't even look up from his computer, dismissing me before I'd even started. "I think we're moving too fast on the demolition. If we tear down the school this weekend, and the community finds out we did it illegally, the media backlash could be devastating. But if we delay just a few weeks and let the legal process play out, we can demolish it legitimately and avoid any negative publicity." Now I had his attention. "The legal process could take months. Every day we delay costs money." "But every day of negative publicity costs more," I countered. "Remember the Philadelphia project? That media circus cost us 3 major contracts and nearly $50 million in lost business. All because we moved too aggressively." I could see him considering it, weighing short-term costs against long-term consequences. Finally, he picked up his phone and called the demolition company. "This is Marcus Mitchell. I need you to postpone the Hartford job until further notice." "Yes, I know, it's short notice. Bill us for the cancellation fee." I had bought Riverside Elementary School time, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. While my father thought he was being strategically cautious, I was already planning the school's permanent salvation. That evening, I met with Victoria at a coffee shop in Brooklyn, far from anywhere we might be recognized. I laid out my full plan for the first time, watching her face cycle through disbelief, hope, and determination. "You're talking about destroying your own family," she said finally. "I'm talking about stopping criminals who happen to share my DNA," I corrected. "There's a difference." Over the next 2 weeks, Victoria became my primary co-conspirator. She provided access to files I couldn't reach, introduced me to other employees who'd grown disgusted with the company's practices, and helped me understand the full scope of my parents' criminal enterprise. There was David Chen, the accountant who'd been forced to falsify environmental reports after my father threatened his wife's immigration status. There was Sarah Rodriguez, the project manager, who'd watched families lose their homes and had started secretly documenting everything, hoping someday she'd have the courage to speak up. There was Michael Thompson, the lawyer who'd been helping cover up the company's crimes while gathering evidence for the day when he could safely expose them. They were all trapped, just like Victoria had been. All afraid of losing their jobs, their freedom, or their family's security. But together we formed something powerful. A network of people on the inside who could coordinate our efforts and protect each other when the time came to act. The breaking point came during my 4th week, when my mother invited me to lunch to discuss my progress in the company. We met at Le Bernardine, one of her favorite restaurants where she felt comfortable speaking freely among the wealthy clientele who shared her worldview. "I'm so pleased with how you've adapted, darling," she said over champagne that cost more than most people's weekly salary. "Your father was worried you'd never outgrow your naive phase, but I always knew you had Mitchell steel in your spine." "Thank you, Mom. That means everything to me. In fact, I have a special opportunity for you. There's a project in Boston that needs someone with your fresh perspective. A community center that's been causing problems for one of our developments. We need someone young and idealistic seeming to convince them to relocate voluntarily. Someone they'll trust." She slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs of smiling children at an after-school program, elderly people enjoying a community garden, and families gathering for what looked like a cultural celebration. At the bottom was a note in my father's handwriting, deadline 30 days, use any means necessary. I looked up to find my mother watching me with cold calculation in her eyes. "Well," she asked, "are you ready to prove you're truly one of us? You know what, I need to hear what you think about this story so far. Are you feeling the tension building because what Serafina's about to discover next will change everything you think you know about this family?" Hit that like button if you're ready for the most shocking twist yet, and let me know in the comments. Do you think she should save the community center or expose her parents right now? Looking at those photographs of innocent families who had no idea they were about to lose their community center, I felt something crystallize inside me. This wasn't just about stopping my parents anymore. This was about dismantling their entire operation before they could destroy another single life. "I'm absolutely ready, Mom," I said, closing the folder with steady hands. "When do I start?" That afternoon, I called an emergency meeting with my alliance. Victoria, David, Sarah, and Michael gathered in Sarah's apartment in Queens, where we could speak freely without fear of surveillance. "They want me to destroy a community center in Boston," I announced, showing them the folder. "But instead, I'm going to use this assignment to bring down the entire company." My plan was ambitious beyond anything we'd discussed before. Instead of just gathering evidence of past crimes, we were going to catch them in the act of committing new ones. And we were going to do it in the most public, undeniable way possible. "The Boston assignment is perfect," I explained. "They're expecting me to manipulate these families into giving up their community center. But what if instead, I help them organize the most effective resistance they've ever seen? What if I turn their own weapon against them? Over the next week, I traveled to Boston and met with the community leaders at the center. Maria Santos, a 60-year-old grandmother who ran the after-school program, welcomed me with the kind of warmth I'd forgotten existed. She had no idea I was connected to the company trying to destroy her life's work. "We've been fighting for 6 months," she told me as we watched children playing in the center's small gymnasium. "Every lawyer we talk to says we don't have a chance. The city council has already approved the development and Mitchell and Associates has too much political influence. What if I told you that you could win this fight?" I asked carefully. "What if you had inside information about their illegal practices?" Maria's eyes sharpened. She was nobody's fool. "I'd ask what you wanted in return and why you were really here." So I told her everything. About my family, about the crimes, about my plan for justice. I showed her recordings of my father bragging about bribing city officials. I showed her the falsified environmental reports that David had copied for me. I showed her evidence that would not only save her community center but could potentially save dozens of other communities across the country. "You're asking me to trust that the granddaughter of Edmund Mitchell, daughter of Marcus and Catherine Mitchell, suddenly grew a conscience?" she asked when I finished. "I'm asking you to trust the evidence," I replied, "and to help me make sure they can never hurt another family like yours." Maria studied my face for a long moment, then made a decision that would change everything. "What do you need from us?" The plan we developed was beautiful in its simplicity. The community would organize a massive public meeting supposedly to discuss their voluntary relocation from the center. They would invite local media, city officials, and concerned citizens. My parents would attend, expecting to present their generous offer to relocate the families to more suitable accommodations. Instead, they would walk into a carefully orchestrated trap. Victoria had discovered that my parents planned to record the meeting secretly, hoping to catch community leaders saying something they could use against them later. But we flipped the script. Sarah, using her project management skills, coordinated with local journalists to ensure they had hidden cameras throughout the room. Michael worked with David to prepare ironclad evidence packets for every reporter in attendance. The night before the meeting, I called my parents with a final report. "The community leaders have agreed to hear our proposal," I told them, injecting just the right amount of excitement into my voice. "I think they're ready to be reasonable about this." "Excellent work, darling," my mother said. "Your father and I will drive up tomorrow morning. We'll close this deal by afternoon." "I'm so proud to be part of this family," I lied smoothly. The meeting was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon at the community center. By 1:30, the room was packed with families, reporters, city officials, and federal agents that Michael had secretly contacted through his law school connections. At exactly 2 o'clock, my parents walked into what they thought was their moment of triumph. My father wore his most expensive suit and his practiced, concerned but firm expression. My mother carried herself with the regal bearing of someone accustomed to getting her way through intimidation and wealth. They had no idea they were walking into their own destruction. "Good afternoon, everyone," my father began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never been seriously challenged. "I'm Marcus Mitchell, and I'm here today to discuss a mutually beneficial solution to our current situation." What happened next was the most satisfying 45 minutes of my life. As my father launched into his prepared speech about upgrading the community to more modern facilities, Maria Santos stood up and began asking questions. Simple questions delivered with devastating precision. "Mr. Mitchell, can you explain why your company's environmental report claims this building is structurally unsound when our independent inspection found no such problems? Can you clarify why your relocation offer is contingent on families waiving their right to sue for damages? Would you care to comment on the recordings we have of you discussing bribes to city officials?" With each question, I watched the color drain from my parents' faces. They tried to maintain control, tried to deflect and obfuscate, but the community had prepared for every one of their tactics. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. My mother, frustrated by the unexpected resistance, let her mask slip completely. "Listen to me, you people," she snapped, her voice sharp with the contempt she'd been hiding. This is not a negotiation. You can take our generous offer and relocate peacefully, or we can make this very unpleasant for you. We own half the city council, and we have ways of making life difficult for families who don't cooperate. The room erupted. Parents shouted in outrage, reporters scrambled to get closer, and cameras captured every second of Catherine Mitchell, revealing exactly who she really was. But the final blow came from me. I stood up slowly, every eye in the room turning to watch as I walked to the front. My parents stared at me in confusion, still not understanding what was happening. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the chaos, "I'd like to introduce myself properly. My name is Serafina Mitchell, and these are my parents. For the past 2 months, I've been working undercover to gather evidence of their crimes. Everything you've heard today is just the beginning. The look of absolute betrayal and shock on their faces was worth every sleepless night, every moment of self-doubt, every second of pretending to be someone I wasn't. You see, I continued addressing the crowd, but never taking my eyes off my parents. They made one crucial mistake. They assumed that sharing their blood meant I shared their values. They forgot that sometimes family isn't about the people who raised you, it's about the people you choose to protect. The silence that followed my revelation lasted exactly 3 seconds before absolute chaos erupted. Reporters surged forward with microphones and cameras. Federal agents moved to secure the exits, and my parents stood frozen in the center of it all like deer caught in headlights. My father was the first to recover his face, cycling through shock, rage, and finally cold calculation. "Serafina, you have no idea what you've just done," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You think these people care about you. You think this community will remember you fondly when their center gets demolished anyway. You're nothing but a naive child playing a game she doesn't understand." "Actually, Dad, I understand perfectly," I replied, pulling out the recording device I'd been carrying. "Just like I understood when you said, and I quote, 'Sometimes you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet.' If a few families get hurt along the way, that's the cost of progress." Or when Mom told that city councilman that his daughter's college recommendation letters might get lost if he didn't vote our way. My mother's face went white. "You've been recording us for 2 months," I confirmed. "Every conversation, every meeting, every casual confession over family dinner. Did you know that Dad once laughed about a family of 5 who ended up homeless because of one of your illegal evictions? He said it was natural selection in action." The federal agents stepped forward, then Agent Rebecca Morrison flashing her badge as she approached my parents. "Marcus and Catherine Mitchell, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, bribery of public officials, and violation of federal housing laws. You have the right to remain silent." Watching my parents get handcuffed in front of the community they'd tried to destroy was surreal. My mother kept looking at me with a mixture of hatred and disbelief, as if she couldn't comprehend that her own daughter had orchestrated their downfall. My father remained silent, but I could see his mind working, already planning his legal defense. The community center erupted in celebration, but I felt strangely hollow. This was what I'd wanted, what I'd worked toward for months, but seeing my parents led away in handcuffs brought no joy. Only a grim satisfaction that justice was finally being served. Maria Santos approached me as the crowd began to disperse. "Mija, what you did today. It took incredible courage. But are you okay? These were your parents." "They stopped being my parents the moment they chose money over human decency," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I'm exactly where I need to be." The next 72 hours were a whirlwind of media interviews, legal depositions, and phone calls from lawyers. The story exploded across national news. Billionaire heiress exposes family's criminal empire. My face was on every major network, my story trending on social media platforms worldwide. But the real satisfaction came from the evidence we'd gathered. Victoria David, Sarah Michael, and I had documented crimes spanning over a decade. 23 families received financial compensation for illegal evictions. 4 environmental violations were exposed, leading to cleanup efforts that would cost the company over $100 million. 17 city officials were investigated for accepting bribes. My parents' empire didn't just crumble, it imploded so completely that even their lawyers abandoned ship. Asset freezes, criminal charges, civil lawsuits, and federal investigations created a perfect storm that obliterated everything they'd built through corruption and cruelty. The most poetic justice came 3 days after their arrest when grandfather Edmund called an emergency board meeting. As majority shareholder, he announced that Marcus and Catherine Mitchell were permanently removed from all positions within the company. Their shares transferred to a trust that would be used exclusively for victim compensation and community development. Furthermore, grandfather said, his voice stronger than I'd heard it in years, I'm announcing my retirement and the appointment of our new CEO, my granddaughter Serafina Mitchell. The boardroom was silent. These were people who'd enabled my parents' crimes, who'd profited from their illegal schemes, and they were now faced with someone who'd already proven she wouldn't hesitate to expose corruption. I understand some of you might be uncomfortable with this transition, I said, taking my place at the head of the conference table. Let me be clear about how this company will operate moving forward. Every project will be legally compliant. Every development will benefit the communities involved. Anyone who has a problem with ethical business practices is free to submit their resignation immediately. 6 people left the room within 10 minutes. The rest stayed either because they genuinely supported the change or because they were too afraid of being exposed to leave. My parents were denied bail after prosecutors argued they were flight risks with significant international assets. From their separate jail cells, they watched their life's work transform into everything they'd despised. The foundation they'd used for money laundering became a legitimate charity providing housing assistance to displaced families. The company they'd built on exploitation became a model for ethical development. But the most devastating blow came from an unexpected source. 3 weeks after their arrest, my mother's sister Patricia called to inform me that the entire extended family had decided to cut ties with Marcus and Catherine completely. We always suspected something wasn't right, Patricia told me during a tearful phone conversation. But we chose to look the other way because the money was nice and they seemed so successful. When we saw the news, saw the evidence you'd gathered, we realized we'd been enabling monsters. The family that my parents had always claimed to be protecting the legacy they'd said justified, their crimes had rejected them entirely. They were truly alone, facing decades in prison, with no one left who cared about their fate. Victoria was promoted to Vice President of Community Development. David became our Chief Financial Officer, tasked with ensuring every dollar was accounted for and properly spent. Sarah took over project management for our new affordable housing initiatives. Michael became our general counsel, his first task being to establish the most comprehensive ethics policies in the industry. The people who'd been trapped by my parents' corruption were now free to build something better. Together, we were transforming a criminal enterprise into a force for positive change. But even as I celebrated our victory, I knew this was just the beginning. The real work. Rebuilding communities, restoring trust, proving that business could be both profitable and ethical, lay ahead. 6 months later, I stood in the same community center where I'd exposed my parents' crimes, but everything had changed. The walls that once needed paint were now vibrant with murals created by local artists. The gymnasium where children played had new equipment donated by our company. The elderly people who used the center for social gatherings now had a modern kitchen and comfortable seating areas. But the biggest change wasn't in the building. It was in the faces of the people who used it. The fear and resignation I'd seen during my first visit had been replaced by hope and pride. They'd saved their community center, but more importantly, they'd learned that they had the power to fight injustice and win. Maria Santos greeted me with a warm hug as I arrived for the center's reopening celebration. Mija, look what we've accomplished together, she said, gesturing around the transformed space. Your parents tried to destroy us, but instead they gave us something beautiful. Proof that good people can triumph over evil. The past 6 months had been the most challenging and rewarding of my life. Taking over a company built on corruption wasn't just about changing policies, it was about changing an entire culture. Every employee had to be retrained, every project had to be reviewed, every business relationship had to be reevaluated. We'd lost some contracts from developers who weren't interested in ethical practices. We'd faced lawsuits from partners who felt betrayed by our sudden commitment to legal compliance. Several board members had tried to orchestrate a coup, claiming I was destroying the company's profitability. But we'd also gained something invaluable: respect. Communities that had once viewed us with suspicion now welcomed our involvement in their neighborhoods. Young professionals wanted to work for us because we represented a new model of responsible business. Investors were attracted to our transparency and long-term sustainability. The financial results spoke for themselves. Despite initial losses from ending our illegal operations, the company was now more profitable than ever. It turned out that ethical business practices, rather than limiting our opportunities, had opened doors we'd never imagined. Our affordable housing projects had waiting lists thousands of people long. Our community development initiatives were being studied by urban planners across the country. Our environmental restoration efforts had won national awards and federal grants. Grandfather Edmund had lived to see the transformation he'd always dreamed of. He'd passed away peacefully 2 months ago, surrounded by the chosen family we'd built together. His funeral was attended not by wealthy business associates or political connections, but by families whose lives had been improved by the company's new direction. As for my parents, they were serving concurrent sentences in federal prison. My father had received 15 years for fraud and bribery. My mother had received 12 years for her role in the money laundering operation. They'd both tried to contact me multiple times, but I'd made my position clear through my lawyers. I had nothing to say to them. Some people couldn't understand how I could cut off my parents so completely. But their family, well-meaning friends would say, "Surely you can forgive them eventually." What they didn't understand was that family isn't just about shared DNA. Family is about shared values, mutual respect, and genuine care for each other's well-being. My parents had forfeited their right to claim me as family when they chose to build their lives on other people's suffering. My real family was here in this community center, surrounded by people who'd chosen to stand with me against injustice. Victoria had become like an older sister, offering guidance when the pressures of running a company became overwhelming. David's quiet integrity reminded me daily why we'd chosen this difficult path. Sarah's passion for social justice kept us focused on our mission. Michael's legal expertise protected us from those who wanted to see us fail. And then there were the families we'd helped. The Johnsons, who'd been illegally evicted from their home of 30 years and were now living in one of our new affordable housing units. The Martinez family, whose children now attended a school we'd helped save from demolition. The elderly, Mr. Patterson, who'd lost his small business to one of my parents' development projects and now managed the community garden we'd established on the site. These people had accepted me not because of my last name or my inheritance, but because of my actions. They'd forgiven me for my family's crimes because I'd proven my commitment to making amends. During the celebration that evening, a reporter from the local news station approached me for an interview. "Serafina, it's been 6 months since you exposed your parents' criminal activities. Do you ever regret the decision to turn them in?" "Never," I replied without hesitation. "The only regret I have is that it took me so long to find the courage to do what was right." What would you say to other people who might be in similar situations, who know about wrongdoing in their families or workplaces, but are afraid to speak up? I thought about that question for a moment, looking around at the celebration. Surrounding us, children were playing games their parents had helped organize. Teenagers were performing music they'd learned in our after-school program. Elderly people were sharing stories and laughter in multiple languages. "I'd tell them that silence is complicity," I said finally. "That every day you choose not to act is another day that innocent people suffer. And I'd tell them that yes, speaking up will cost you something. Maybe everything you thought you wanted." But what you'll gain is something far more valuable: the knowledge that you chose justice over comfort, truth over convenience, and love over fear. As the evening wound down and families began heading home, Maria Santos pulled me aside one last time. "Misha, I have something for you," she said, handing me a small wooden frame. Inside was a photograph from our first meeting when I'd still been pretending to work for my parents' interests. "I want you to remember where this all started, with one person deciding to choose love over hate." Looking at that photograph now, I could barely recognize the conflicted young woman who'd walked into this center 6 months ago. That person had been torn between loyalty to her family and commitment to justice. This person, the one I'd become, knew exactly where she belonged. So here's my question for all of you watching. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? Have you seen injustice happening around you and wondered if you had the courage to speak up? I want to hear your stories in the comments below, because every story of courage inspires someone else to find their own strength. If this story of family karma and justice served cold resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that truth always wins in the end. Subscribe for more real-life stories about choosing integrity over convenience and love over fear. Thank you for taking this journey with me, for believing that one person really can make a difference, and for understanding that sometimes the family we choose is more important than the family we're born into. Remember, justice might take time, but it's always worth fighting for. Until next time, keep choosing courage over comfort, and never forget that your voice has the power to change the world.